Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Inept General, and welcome to my Hochland lore video for Total War Warhammer. Now, Hochland is a relatively small province of the Empire, located kind of in its heart, if not to the northern edge. It's mainly populated by a large section of the eastern half of the Dracwald Forest, making it a heavily wooded area, and is located just here on the map of the Empire. Now, in terms of Hochland's history, Hochland was assigned to the Cherusен tribe by Sigmar after the people of the Cherusен helped Sigmar fight off all of his enemies from the Greenskin battle at the Battle of Blackfire Pass. They became established as the province of Hochland. Now, this was actually a hotly debated topic at the time of Sigmar, because the Cherusен people had for a long time kind of mixed in with the people who would go on to form the province of Talabecland. Now, the difference here was that eventually they kind of separated, but would intermingle. There was a bit of confusion as to the separation of these two people, but it was seen that Chief Alicis of the Cherusен was in fact a distinct people, and that they were awarded their own province, and rightfully so, by Sigmar. Now, over the times, they would come under a number of different threats in Hochland. The probably most significant of these was the threat of Gorfor, perhaps the most famous of all the Beastmen lords in the history of the Beastmen, who came out from the Middle Mountain, destroyed most of Ostland, had started to move into Hochland, and really eventually got stopped in the city of Hergig itself after he'd managed to bust down the gates of the city and was storming it. Gorfor was brought down by the Elector Count of Hochland at the time, with the Runefang being embedded into him, just as Gorfor had run through the Count himself. If you want a bit more detail on Gorfor's story and his rampage across the northeastern part of the Empire, do check the top right-hand corner now, or you'll find Gorfor's full story in the link below. But anyway, so that's kind of probably that's probably the largest threat that's ever faced the people of Hochland. But they have faced some other historical threats, a couple of internal conflicts as well. For example, at a time there's been the threat of violence about illegal logging with their cousins on the border of Ostland. They once saved Karl Franz himself by being ambushed by a bunch of beastmen, and that's why, if you notice the two insignias, on the left is the one they use in Total War Warhammer, and on the right is the one that's kind of historically known in the Warhammer game itself as Hochland's flag. And in the middle, you'll see the emblem for Karl Franz himself. And this is because one of the famous Dracwald patrols that Hochland used a lot of their military force for encountered Karl Franz in the area that would become known as the Weeping Glen, and they saved his life in that battle. And so Karl Franz, as a sort of sign of respect and matter of reward, allowed them to emblazon his own emblem as Emperor onto their own symbol. Another sort of domestic dispute that actually occurred in Hochland was known as the Battle of the Horn, whereby Stirland and Hochland came into conflict over the use of the horn in their symbols for their country, because it was slightly disputed. Now, the exact severity of this conflict, I'm not exactly sure, whether it's just a singular battle and then the Emperor at the time put a stop to it. I'm not 100% sure on the details of the Battle of the Horn, but, you know, there are some internal conflicts with Hochland and some of its Empire cousins. So just bear that in mind. As for the geography of Hochland, Hochland is very much a heavily wooded province, kind of taking up much of the eastern Dracwald forest. There seems to be forests covering most of the area. Now, the terms of weather conditions, there's a lot of heavy snows and heavy rains, and much of the province being kind of intertwined with a number of different rivers is prone to a lot of flooding. Because of this, a lot of the areas of Hochland have developed intricate dike systems to kind of filter away this flood water, to use it to try and make the most of what little good soil there is to use to grow crops in Hochland. Now, there's not a lot of great farming land in the province. Most farms tend to be around the banks of rivers, and that's where they grow most of the produce. Now, food-wise, Hochland is just about self-sustainable. However, for luxury goods, they really have to try and get most of their stuff from their neighbours in Midland. But on the whole, Hochland does have enough food to keep itself going. Not many luxuries, but a lot of forests, a lot of game to be had in those forests, rich wildlife, which a lot of them hunt and feed on and make a living off, and a number of helpful trade roads come through Hochland that allow it to make a good bit of economic capital from the trade that comes across the province. So a couple of very important sort of routes to know is the North Road, which runs along Hochland going up towards Ehrengrad, and the Old Forest Road as well, which runs through a significant part of Hochland going to other parts of the Empire. Now, these two main thoroughways do provide Hochland with a lot of trade opportunities, and they look to make the most of it due to a lack of hugely abundant farmlands, which they don't have. And so they look to make money in other innovative ways due to the geography of the province itself. Now, there is one notable clearance in Hochland, and that is the Wies Hills. Now, the Wies Hills are kind of moors and hills and slightly boggy areas as well, but it's kind of a clear area amongst the whole wooded territory of Hochland itself. Now, in terms of important places, one of the most significant parts of Hochland is Fort Schippel up in the Wies Hills themselves. Now, forts like this one exist all over Hochland, and they're very important. Even the inns are fortified all over Hochland, and that's because the Drackwald is a particularly dangerous place. Number of beastmen herds linger in the woods. All kinds of monstrosities can linger in the woods of the Drackwald as well. But what Fort Schippel is particularly well known for is for trying to dissuade groups of outlaws. A lot of outlaws make their homes in the Wies Hills because there's a lot of places to hide, but also because if you were a lunatic outlaw, you'd set up a camp in the Drackwald, promptly probably to be eaten by a wandering giant or slaughtered by a beast herd pottering by. All kinds of horrible ways of dying can befall you if you're in the woods. However, these hills are a little bit clearer and thus afford outlaws the opportunity to sort of make camps or temporary shelters and sort of hide out in the hills and probably live a bit longer than they would camping out in the Drackwald itself. So this fort is particularly good at trying to hold down and maintain the outlaw problem in the area. Another distinct area of interest in the province of Hochland is the town of Esk up in the north. Now, the town of Esk is particularly well known for the home of copper mining in Hochland. There's a fantastic copper mine up there. It's very profitable for the province, provides a lot of copper out of it. But there's a couple of dark aspects about the town as well. Most recently, in sort of modern history, there's an old castle that is around the town that is laid empty for near on centuries and has recently come into being rehabilitated, rebuilt slightly. People see lights on there at night. No one's really sure what's going on, but rumors are abound that a necromancer has moved in, and that's bad news for all of the population of Esk and may threaten copper mining in the future of Hochland. So something to watch out for. So moving on from Esk, we have the area of Graden. Now, Graden or Groiden is really kind of a tourism hub. Now, Hochland, as I mentioned, makes a lot of money on trade. There are a lot of competing coach lines, so for transporting trade. Chief amongst these is maybe the Wolf Run Company and the Tunnelway Company, and they've come to some sort of civil blows and commercial disputes in the past. But another thing, apart from trade and timber, is hunting and skirmishing and stuff like that. We'll get onto that a bit more later, but it's also the idea of tourism. So in the town of Graden, it's really become this hub of religious tourism. They've built shrines to almost every conceivable god within the empire. They've spared no expense in decorating these shrines, made them some of the best shrines around, and they've drawn attention from a lot of people. And so Graden brings in a lot of tourism into the area. And in fact, there's a very mysterious character who lives up in Graden, known as the Seer of Graden. And his name at the moment is Klaus Homstedt, and he's said to have lived for over 100 years and has the ability to see someone's future. Now, with this gift, you might think, oh, he must be making a mint, all the nobles and stuff. How's he not sitting in some castle somewhere if he can read the future? But apparently he's very oddly selective about the people he sees. Sometimes he will see a noble, sometimes he'll see a peasant, sometimes he'll turn away an elect account. All kinds of odd decisions have been made, and no one's sure how he picks the people he sees and gives a reading to, but he's oddly selective and no one's really been able to identify his pattern as of yet. So there's an odd chap just wandering around this part of Hochland. Up in the northeast, we have the town of Hazelbeck. Now, this is a town particularly well known for training handgunners, and just to the southeast of that is the town of Sermigols, best pronunciation I can come up with, guys, and that's a town particularly well renowned for the spearmen it produces. So some very militaristic towns up in the northeast of Hochland, producing some fine soldiers for the province itself. Now, let's go back down to the capital, Hergig. This is where Gorthor himself got defeated. A very interesting town, a real center of learning in the area. A lot of colleges and private academies have been set up. There's even a college of magic in Hergig, which has been licensed by the Emperor to really sort of research magic. Not necessarily teach magic, but research kind of the systems of magic. It, of course, teaches magic as well in the process of teaching people how to research it. But it's really looking at like pushing magic to see what it can do, rather than just learning what's already known. Now, Hergig, of course, is being run by the Ludenhof family. And the Ludenhofs are the elector counts of the province, have been for many, many years now, many centuries, and they run the town of Hergig. The elector count's mansion, however, is actually outside of the town at the moment, but we'll get into that when we speak about the elector count himself. There's also a huge rebuilding effort going on in Hergig at the moment. A lot of sort of previous wooden structures are being replaced by stone ones, by just new brick constructions, and there's a whole bunch of dwarves who have been brought in to help the people of Hochland in this kind of re-engineering of the stone and stonemasonry, and they've set up a nice little dwarven quarter within the city so they can go home and have a rest between the rebuilding efforts of the town, from a town of sort of wood to a town of stone, and that seems to be what's going on in the city of Hergig at the moment. As for the people of Hergig, I'm actually kind of delighted to say for this one, they're not hardy, they're not like bitter and unemotional, they're not hoity-toity and pompous, they're just nice people. The people of Hochland are just nice, they get along, they're said to speak in a very sort of warm and approachable manner, with a slightly mild accent. They kind of employ some animalistic sort of characters. I don't exactly know what that means. Maybe they use animal noises instead of the replacement of some words, or animal noises to describe an animal. I'm not exactly sure what it means, but they're said to be very warm-hearted, kind people, not particularly warlike. As I said during the history portion, they're descendant from the Cherusson tribe, which had had a lot of intermingling with the tribe that would later go on to form Talabecland. Now, the Talabeclands are much more warlike than their Hochlander neighbors, and so when war tends to approach Hochland, they tend to disappear into the woods. They're not, like, if they don't have to fight at that juncture, they don't have any problem retreating into the woods, as they are keen woodsmen living in the area. Now, most Hochlanders make a living, as I've mentioned before. There are some farms, but not many. So a lot of them make a living through timber, through trade, through fishing and hunting, or through any kind of tourism laws they can have in the province. Because of this, they're also said to be famed hunters and trackers, and you know, there's such a famous dish in Hochland known as just the Hochland venison that's so good that it's gone all over the empire. However, many gourmands have said that it never tastes quite as nice as when eating it under a starlit night in Hochland itself. So there we go. They love their venison. And these skills, as like trappers and hunters and sort of trackers as well, has allowed them to become very keen marksmen and scouts and skirmishers in Empire armies. And so they're very valued as those. And because of the heavily wooded area in Hochland, they've also taken great pride in the skill of marksmanship. So if you're faced in the woods and you see a few, like 5 or 10 beasts charging towards you and your hunting party, you'd better make sure everyone in that hunting party can drop a beastman with a single shot of their arrow, rather than, because they won't, by the time they've seen them, you won't have time to reload. So you've got that shot, and you better make it count. is the kind of Hochlanders' idea of why they've become such good marksmen. Having this sort of tradition of marksmanship, it did lead some Hochland engineers, and one in particular by the name of Leon Todmeister, to invent a certain contraption that we now know as the Hochland long rifle, or as it's known in its original words, Leon Todmeister's fantabulously far-reaching harquebus of unforeseeable and unperceived bereavement, as it was originally called when first invented, but I think you guys will agree, much like I, that the long rifle is a much better name for it. Now, the innovation that Leon Todmeister had put into this lovely rifle was that he'd inserted grooves into the barrel, which allowed the bullets to spin, making them much more accurate over long distances. And so in the years that have gone by, it's become a favorite among snipers, amongst engineers, just for kind of long distance killing. Now, in terms of the tabletop, one of the aspects of the long rifle was that it used to allow you to pick out and snipe characters even though they were in regiments. So that could historically have come in very handy in the Warhammer tabletop game. If we ever see the long rifle introduced in Total War Warhammer, I think it will be with the engineers coming in as a hero for the Empire, and we'll see them introduced then. But that was a Hochland long rifle that was invented by the people of Hochland. And the Hochlanders are often mocked for having a love of their bows or rifles, so much so that it can even at times rival the love they have for their other halves or their wives. And that's kind of a common parlance when describing Hochlanders. They just love their bows and their weaponry. But on the whole, Hochlanders, as I said, are a positive, cheery group, said to be almost undefeatable spirit of optimism, and be loyal, valiant, and adaptable, and really just open and friendly to anyone who comes near them. Now, some people have said that this is largely because they have a kind of naivety. But you know what? If the people are nice, people are nice. They do have a slight weakness when it comes to being distracted by the element of sport, and that can maybe, one could argue, expand into gambling and stuff like that. But on the whole, just a lovely people from one has to say, not the most hospitable of provinces. So good for them, I guess. Well done, Hochlanders, for being bloody nice people in a bloody horrible world. In terms of their religion, Hochlanders tend to, as all Empire provinces do, prioritize the worship of Sigmar. Well, not all Empire provinces prioritize Sigmar, but Sigmar is probably the top god in Hochland. But because of this element of tourism and religious pilgrimage, they're trying to get those pilgrimage dollars. They do worship a number of other gods in the Empire and human pantheon. Chief amongst these are Ral, Rea, and Ulrich, predominantly in the northwestern parts of Hochland. But they tend to be the main three, but there are very elaborate shrines built to all the pantheon of the human gods. We've gone into some of these gods before in previous province videos, so do check those out if you want a bit more background on the Empire pantheon. So they have a sort of religious, I don't want to say flexibility, but no matter what your religious sort of devotion, short of chaos or horned rat worship, they kind of have you covered in Hochland. Although, having said that, there is thought to be a group of chaos cultists, particularly Khorne cultists, known as the Crimson Skulls, who are rumored to have been infiltrated themselves into the Hochland military. But at this point in time, that is only rumored, for surely, if any such cult existed, the priests and witch hunters would root them out toot sweet. Talking of the military of Hochland, much of Hochland's military from day to day is really set about patrolling the Drakwold, and they do this in sort of specially established units. They usually consist of a main company, which is usually a close combat company like halberdiers or something along those lines, and then a couple of complementary detachments. Whether these be additional swordsmen or close combat troops or units of handgunners, whatever form they may take. There are a couple of other regiments that have been spoken about in Hochland, but I haven't been actually managed to source myself. People have spoken about the Jägerkorps, which are essentially a company of handgunners who all use Hochland long rifles. Now, I'm not sure if this was mentioned in the campaign or something along those lines. I've not actually been able to track down the source of the Jägerkorps thing myself, but that's a possibility if we ever see a separate Hochland army, which I don't think we'll be seeing for a fairly long time. In terms of other sort of military organizations within Hochland, there's said to be a chapter house of the Knights of the Broken Sword, formed after Gorbad's invasion of the Empire. If you'd like to know more about Gorbad's invasion, do check my Missing Legendary Lords Greenskin edition, popping up in the top right hand corner now, or you'll find a link down in the description below. But they had eventually a leader called Dot Barthor. Now Dot Barthor got into a fight with a beast lord known as Sislak Grimhoof, and he managed to split this beast lord's skull, but in doing so cracked his own sword, thus earning them the name the Knights of the Broken Sword. And they're said to have a chapter house in Hochland, and maybe could be called upon if a Hochland army ever needs them. Now let's move on to some of the important characters in the province of Hochland. We've already spoken about the Seer of Graden or Groiden and his abilities to see in the future. There's also a well-known mercenary captain who we have bumped into in our adventures with Commander Bernhard in Dark Omen, and that is, of course, Jurgen Month. Now, Jurgen Month led a group of outlaws who eventually could have joined Commander Bernhard in his missions during that wonderful game that holds a special place in my heart. But moving on from Jurgen Month, we also have General Stefan von Brichthoff, who is said to be a deadly shot with a Hochland long rifle, but he's a general who can represent the armies of Hochland. And also of late, a certain young Captain Katzberger has been building a bit of a reputation for himself, leading the Katzberger patrol, and he has learned a name particularly amongst the rank and file of the men of the Hochland army by single-handedly slaying a Minotaur. And so he is leading a patrol that is continuing to gain a very feisty reputation within the armies of Hochland itself, and is certainly probably a star to watch for the future. But moving on perhaps now to the most important character within the Hochland army and within Hochland itself, Elector Count Aldebrand Ludenhof. Now, Aldebrand, although perhaps leading one of the smaller provinces of the empire, has nonetheless earned himself a reputation as a valiant leader amongst the other Elector Counts. Said to be physically very tall and very thin, but that frame seems to hide a kind of immensely strong body, and he's said to have huge amounts of stamina. Now, Aldebrand is a keen huntsman and is said to have a huge collection of hunting birds, and he very much enjoys sort of falconry and hawking and whatever you want to call it. And it's said within his palace, which is actually located outside of Hergig, so he can do more hunting in the woods, every room has a bird of prey in it, ready for the hunt. So when he goes into battle, he's usually upon his warhorse, and he'll always have the Runefang of Hochland, which is known as Goblin's Bane, but he will also have his trusty bird of prey of the moment in there to assist him with battle. Now, in the tabletop of the game, what this bird did was it just gave him an extra attack. But in Total War Warhammer, if we ever see him introduced, I'd love it if he could kind of send out his bird as a kind of missile, a ranged missile attack. That would have a bit of a cooldown on it. You'd see the bird go across the battlefield, lunge down, take a hit, take a bit of damage off of any enemy it hit, and then kind of return back to him. I think that'd be a cool little effect that I think the guys at Creative Assembly are more than able to carry out. So that's really Count Aldebrand. He's, as I said, looks quite not very imposing, although he is tall, but physically not very imposing, but a valiant and good leader of the province of Hochland. He also has a son known as Konrad Ludenhof, who would take over in the event that anything happened to him. But, you know, kind of a fun character. The little hawk on the shoulder would be a nice little differentiator between him and the other Elector Counts. So look forward to seeing him in the game, hopefully at some point in the future. As always, guys, a huge thank you for watching, and a special thanks goes out to my patrons, Huli, Reese, Colin, Thomas, Mateus, Samuel, Matthews, David, Peter, Sign of the Emperor, Niblets, Caliph, and Nigel. And yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed that one, and I hope to catch you all on the next one.